Okay. Okay. Yeah, I turned it on. Let's see. Well, can't have everything, I guess. Never mind. All good. Let's try if it wakes up. No, still nothing. Okay. So, Ruby is boring. When Christoph asked me if I would give a talk on this meetup, he said, "Listen, I need somebody with a success story that kind of made it from idea to an IPO." And I must admit, I didn't do an IPO. I just left the company. Well, I did sell some shares, so I guess that's close enough to tell you the whole story. So I would like to say that, yeah, I'm neither like Andras said, I'm neither a zero nor a hero, just some dude from Prekmurje who comes to Ljubljana to meet the civilization and all its advances while living on the border with Hungary. About myself, I would say I'm a jack of all trades and master of, well, I should say some as well, but in reality I'm a generalist. I solve problems in a 80-20 manner. Do you guys know what an 80-20 principle is? So for those of you that don't, you need 20% of the time to get 80% there and vice versa. So I'd like to think I usually get, with my limited 20% skill set, I get 80% there, and then somebody else comes in and picks it up and takes it, to the end, so to speak. So my name is Tomaž Zaman. I'm the founder of Codable, the online outsourcing service for WordPress. Codable is, as the time of my leaving last year in April, we had 35,000 customers globally. The app was written in Ruby. But before we get to Ruby, let's talk about PHP a little bit. Who by the show of hands, who here thinks or have thought at any point in time in the past that PHP is an inferior language? Yeah, okay. Who here thinks that PHP is a boring language? Okay, fair enough. So what is the thing that makes a language boring? What would you say? Or let's put it in another way. What would you say makes a language interesting? What? Well, I would argue that it's either drama or lack thereof. So when there's no drama, a language is boring. And that's a good thing, I would argue. So Ruby has very little to no drama. If you compare it to other languages, the Python clusterfuck that's, I think, still going on between the version 2 and 3 and the fights and the decisions and the mailing lists. Nothing? No? Well, there is some. And then there's your JavaScript versus TypeScript, and then there's your Angular, React, Vue fights going on. Ruby has very little drama. So I would say the drama is what makes, or lack thereof makes a language either boring or not. But before we talk kind of more in depth, let's talk about my beginnings. So about 12 years ago, I just got my kids were my twins were 2 years old. I was a struggling freelancer without any self-promotional or marketing skills. However, I did just do a certificate for this content management system called Typo3. Do you guys know what Typo3 is? It's a bottomless pit of hell where despair takes over and depression sets in, and it's horrible, but it pays well, right? It pays well, and I discovered that online. There's an online marketplace called, now it's called Upwork, but it used to be called Elance, and there was the other one called Odesk, and they merged, and now it's Upwork. So, because I was struggling, didn't know how to make money, especially living in Prekmurje, which is in the middle of nowhere, I looked online and I find some gigs on Elance. And after a while, I discovered that I don't want to sell my time because most of us are, we're charging by the hour, we're selling our time. It's just not scalable. You have the same amount of time as everybody else. So how could I scale someone else's time was my train of thought. And then I met my co-founder, Per Esbensen, who is now still running the company. He's a Danish entrepreneur, and I needed somebody that would, tame my lack of focus, give me some direction, but most importantly, have, how do you call it, like accompany my skill set. I'm a developer. I needed somebody who would run the business side, so accountants, invoicing, marketing, even support. So we quickly sat together, and I said, "Listen, would you join me?" Because Elance, or I would say most of the online outsourcing services have this issue. So they have a lot of developers, too many developers, and what they do to get jobs is they race to the bottom when it comes to pricing, and that's a really bad model. So at Codable, what we did is we said, okay, let's make it the most expensive service possible that will still hold water and see if it turns out well. And as I said, well, last year we had 35,000 customers worldwide, about 1,000 developers, and just shy of 30 employees. We settled on the CMS we all absolutely adore, WordPress. Up until that point, I had no experience with WordPress whatsoever. We chose it just because we needed to focus on a niche, right? If we with just two schmucks, one from Slovenia and one from Copenhagen, said, okay, we're going to attack Elance that had millions in venture capital from the US, we would fail. But when we went into WordPress, the WordPress ecosystem quickly adopted us for their own. So I would say it was a niche, a very big one, 33, well, back at the time it was like, I think 27% of the web big niche. So it was good enough. So because we settled we're gonna attack WordPress, we also needed to pick a language for our web application. And all the cool kids at the time were running Ruby on Rails. So we said, fuck it, let's do it ourselves as well. The working name of the app at the time was Carnivore because it was with developer Karma, but we turned it into the name Codable shortly thereafter because a friend of Per's said, listen, this Carnivore is not gonna cut it. So we became Codable, and yeah, the company is still Codable. What we decided, which will turn out to be, well, it was a good decision at the time, but now I wouldn't do it again, is we needed a front end because we decided, okay, we're gonna do two-part app. So the Ruby backend and then the JavaScript front end. And yeah, it took us about 3 to 4 months to develop the initial prototype, the application. And it was just two developers, me and Matjaž Muhic. He lived in, I don't even know the place, Velika Nedelja, yeah. And now he lives at near Ptuj. And he was also, because we couldn't afford to pay him, we actually gave him some shares so he would work for us full time. So what we did is I would write JavaScript and he would write Ruby. And I would then also be improvised sysadmin in order to deploy the application on Amazon, but the Kubernetes stack wasn't there yet. So they had some convoluted way of real-time zero downtime deployment, which I think they canceled. I don't even remember the name of the service. I don't think it exists anymore. And then we moved about 6 years ago, we moved to Google Kubernetes engine because we shaved off about 40% of the price for the, I don't know what today's prices are, but it made economic sense, and also for me it made ideological sense because Kubernetes was made by Google. So the thought process was, okay, let's move it to Google because they invented this. They must be good at hosting it. So that's what. So a double win. And at the time, I don't know what the situation is today. At the time, Google had much more user-friendly documentation. Like you had like your high-level technical stuff, but then it also had several tutorials on how to solve different problems. So if we rewind back to today. The company is now making 10 mil yearly revenue revenue, and guess how many developers it has?
4.
2. Well, I'm lying a bit. In fact, it has 5 developers, but 2 are for Ruby only. So we only have 2 Ruby developers. The rest are working on the front end because Angular. It's not a boring language. I wish it was boring, but Angular because I was naive and stupid at the time, so Angular was the fresh new thing. Let's go with Angular. But then before they get to 1.0 and then 2.0, the changes were insanely breaking, not just slightly. So there was a lot of effort for us to upgrade Angular. So would I do it any differently if I started all over the project today? And the answer is no, I would not. From a technical perspective, ever so slightly, I would say, but not from a mindset perspective. Because the Ruby toolbox is, for the most part, very similar today as it was 10 years ago. There's no major breaking either changes or bugs or whatever that would make me change my mind, but it also brings some stuff I love. I still write Ruby for my own pleasure, let's call it, or some hobby projects I need to work on, despite going mostly out of the web development, such as Turbo. I absolutely love Turbo when I kind of got how it works. I think it simplified the whole stack a lot, but you have to get it. But it's very simple. It's like couple of pages of documentation. So I absolutely love what Rails has become today. Hopefully that's not a problem. When I speak about Ruby and Rails, they're like one without another is kind of pointless because there's very few projects of note that do Ruby without the Rails. Obviously there are some, but yeah. Now, when I talk with people, there's a couple of, counterpoints that people bring to the table, which is, that Ruby is slow. Yeah, Ruby compared to some other languages, I would say Ruby is slow. But I would argue that the speed doesn't really matter because it's all about expectation management, right? Just this morning, before I left for Ljubljana, I chose to install or update my Mac OS to Sonoma, the last Mac OS. And it said about 10 minutes, and I was like, okay, cool. I can take a shower, doom scroll toilet on Twitter some, and then I'll be back and it'll be done. And I was back and it was done. So it's all about expectation management. This is why sliders and progress bars and scrolling wheels are invented. So you let people know that something is going on, right? This is on us, the developers, to let people know that something is going on. This is how we fail a lot. Even in Codable, once we started to doing quantitative tests with people, like quantitative I mean, we would sit them down in front of us and we say, okay, submit a project, but just think loudly if you can. And they thought loudly. And the first time we tried that experiment, it was like, I thought to myself, obviously, I didn't say it. I invited my friends for the first trial, and I was like, are you fucking stupid? I thought to myself again, I didn't say it out loud, like, what are you doing? But then, through those tests, I kind of discovered I'm the one that's fucking stupid because I'm not presenting it in a clear and concise way or well enough that the clients who use our apps would be, comfortable with, or it would be straightforward for them, right? So because Rails renders a particular page or returns something in I don't know, 40 milliseconds, it's no reason to panic, right? And then a few years ago, everybody was talking about microservices, right? Microservices were all the hype, you know, how you should split it out, that it's too monolithic. And I would argue very much against it. What we did at Codable, as I said, we had two apps, or let's call it two repos, their own things. One was the Codable backend API, which was Ruby on Rails, and the other one was front-end Angular app. And what we did pretty much at the beginning is we would have two code bases, two separate code bases. However, even just with two code bases for the same project, we split it then into 4 branches. So we needed, you know, our master, which was production worthy, then staging, then feature, and then we also had a beta. So 4 branches. Now you have to communicate between all the people. Luckily, the team was small, so it was doable, but still there was significant and measurable overhead because people needed to talk to another. I'm working on a branch, on a feature branch, and I need API support, right, for that. So API needed their own branch. If that was merged, that wouldn't be a problem. So I would advocate for not using multiple, if you can, multiple repos, but merge it all together. I don't see how that's a problem. Rails is complex, you know, when it comes to gems, particularly, like which gems to use, how many gems you have, do the gems impact speed? Of course they do, but as I said earlier, it's not in any kind of measurable way. Have you seen Node.js server-side dependency tree? It goes into thousands of nodes sometimes. That's horrible. Like Rails, it's fine. However, what all the gems bring us, and what all the factor that, or what we need to do when we do a monolithic app, is called the separation of concerns. Probably you all know what the separation of concerns is, so I won't go into details. By the way, do you know who this gentleman is? Yeah, if you don't know, his name is Robert Martin, goes by the name of Uncle Bob. He owns a Java development firm, a big one and an important one. And his podcasts or show is called Clean Coders. I think it's cleancoders.com. You're more than welcome to visit it and to see some of his lectures, because he talks about not just separation of concerns, but testing also. He's a maniac about testing, which I'm not, I'll admit it. But yeah, you can learn a lot from him. So, is Ruby and Rails, for that matter, boring? Yes, because there's very little drama. This picture actually was taken, I have to plug in Ogrodje as well. This was taken when we recorded Ogrodje, our podcast, that you're also more than welcome to listen or have a look on YouTube. And so why do I love Ruby and Rails is because it allows us to move fast and break things, right? It's still kind of a mantra. Well, it was when we were beginning, right? Do that, and for us it works. Now I'm personally working on a couple of hardware projects, and I only wish we had this kind of luxury of moving fast and breaking things, which we don't. When you order 1,000 pieces to be manufactured, and you have to pay them in tens of thousands of dollars or euros or whatever. When you just need to comparatively change a couple of lines of code and redeploy, you can see the scope or the magnitude. But the best part about taking Rails is that you see your shit work. That's what we are all after, right? It's only a tool, and it's up to us to leverage, it to the highest degree. What I want to say, I don't know. Oh yeah, Facebook. You think your typical Facebook user knows the technology, that it's built on PHP? No. Do you think they care? No. What do they care about? Conspiracy theories. I'm just kidding. So, what about tests? Well, I hate them. That's all. Thank you. Questions?
Why do you hate tests?
Why do I hate tests? I don't know. I do know. I hate them because they're hard to write. They're not hard to write. There's no clear way of doing things. Well, I could say that for most of development, but it's, let's say, you don't see their effect until you see their effect. If you know what I mean? Like your app works, but then it doesn't work and you debug and it works again. And then you can still break it because you didn't have tests in the same manner, right? Tests prevent you to do that. So I currently am writing an app for myself. It's for photographers, so it's not a big deal. It's like a side or a side project. And I wrote 8 tests for the whole app, but they're integration tests. So it opens like a fake browser, it clicks around, it does the whole login, so register, login, solve the problem that you need to solve with the app and log out. So just takes the green path. If it's happy, I'm happy. Because honestly, what I've seen in Codable is that usually if it either, they all break or none. It's either, you know, so it does, for the most part, like you will do like a syntax error or some bullshit like that it will prevent your Docker container to even run, right? This is what we're dealing with usually on Codable, or we're dealing with, right? Not the particular method wouldn't calculate right, you know. But even if the methods themselves would fail, like in a so that the app would still be running, we would catch that with Sentry, for example. So we were not particularly bothered because Sentry, you know, at the first time it occurred, Sentry would send a report and then we would fix it, obviously, you know.
Yeah, but integration tests are still tests and you like those.
No, I don't like them. I did them just so I can deploy with these base. So I'm like, okay, I can deploy you, everything else Sentry will tell me. So, yeah. It's like, makes sense?
Fail
Yeah.
as we go.
Sorry?
Fail as we go.
Fail as we go, yeah. And it worked. It worked for, well, until now, I guess, so it was fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so you were saying if you would do anything differently if you started again,
Yeah.
you were also, like we were talking about the monolith, would you maybe go for a full monolith now?
Yes.
Or do you think it's still, there's benefits to having a separate front?
Honestly, I don't have enough experience with microservices to say that, yeah, microservices are still, they're probably still valid. I just don't know the reasons. I mean, people use them, but for me personally, I would separate concerns in other way within the same code base rather than splitting it out into separate ones. But again, I imagine because Codable, you know, was or is still a small company when it comes to developer. Like as I said earlier, there's just 5 of them, so it's still easy to communicate. I imagine if you have, I don't know, 50 developers working on a project, then it's a more complex topic, and at that point there might be, you know, that you have a project lead for a particular code base and they manage it, you know, on a higher level, I guess. So that would be the reason. I imagine, as I said, I haven't worked on a project of that scale.
But also, if you do it this way, which you did, to do it separately, then it forces you to do this separation of concerns, at least on this, like talking to the database.
Yes.
And then you don't have a choice, but if you put it all together, then you might, like, some guy might go around that and be like, I'll just fetch it myself.
Yeah, we had multiple rules, but the one that we all kind of respected was that master of any branch, of any code base is always deployable, always, automatically. So what we did, nobody was allowed to push to master. What you were to do is you would write a feature, for example, a feature branch. You would do your feature, run the test, blah, 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 make it work. And then somebody else would merge it into the master. So you would ping your other, because we had, first we had 2 pairs of developers. So we had two Ruby developers, well, still do. And one of them would work on a feature, then the other one would need to go through the code, through the documentation, through the tests, and then merge it in master. Merging it in master would either any kind of change on the repo would automatically trigger cloud build, which would build the Docker image and then deploy it on Google Kubernetes. So that's how we solved, and we said, everybody was afraid, to push their own kind of. You're always a bit weary when it comes to pushing your own code to master, which it automatically turns out on production. Period. There's no way to stop. Well, you could stop it manually on cloud build because it takes 10 minutes, but we didn't want. We were like, this is always production worthy. The master. Well, it's now called main, I think. Yeah, whatever. So, yeah. Hope it answers your question. Maybe. Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.